Hello. Is this the yeshiva of Rabbi Yaakov Raphael Payanu of Modena?
Yes, it is.
This is a surprising tale of a political and religious upheaval that sent shockwaves across Europe in the 16th century, a saga that led to England breaking away from the Catholic Church. It is the story of King Henry VIII of England and his infamous Great Matter. In 1530, King Henry sought to annul his marriage to his queen, Catherine of Aragon, the daughter of King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella of Spain. Catherine had failed to give birth to a male heir, and Henry's heart had strayed toward another woman, Anne Boleyn. Catholicism does not allow for divorce, but it permits marriage annulment, whereby the Church declares that a marriage was not valid to begin with. For a king, however, an annulment had to be sanctioned by none other than the Pope. And that is where Henry ran into a brick wall. Pope Clement VII refused to provide a marriage annulment. Why was the Pope opposed to the annulment? The answer lies in the towering figure of another European king, Charles V, known as the Holy Roman Emperor. Just 3 years prior, in 1527, Charles captured Rome, effectively turning the Pope into his puppet. Charles had no intention of allowing the Pope to annul Henry's marriage to Catherine because Charles's mother Joanna was Catherine's sister. Charles knew that his Aunt Catherine wished to remain Queen of England. Charles therefore used his immense influence over the Pope to create a formidable obstacle for Henry. Henry was undeterred. He and his advisors crafted a strategy that would pressure the Pope to grant the annulment. Their plan was to argue that Henry's marriage to Catherine was immoral and had to be annulled. Their reasoning? Catherine had previously been married to Henry's older brother, Arthur. Back in 1501, Catherine married Arthur, the heir to the English throne. Both Catherine and Arthur were 15 years old at the time. Their marriage was arranged by their parents, creating a powerful alliance between Spain and England. Tragically, Arthur died just months later, and to preserve the alliance, Catherine was subsequently married to Arthur's younger brother Henry in 1509, when he was 17 and she was 23. Their marriage required a special papal dispensation because marrying a deceased brother's widow was rare and controversial in Catholicism. Henry's team now sought to exploit this unorthodox history to pressure the Pope into annulling the king's marriage. They did so by gathering testimonies from various scholars, claiming that marrying a brother's widow was a grave sin. It should not have been allowed to begin with. Curiously, they also hoped to approach Jewish authorities for support. The problem with consulting the Jews was that England had expelled all of its Jewish subjects some 240 years earlier, in King Edward's 1290 Edict of Expulsion. King Henry therefore dispatched a close confidant, Richard Croke, to Italy. His mission: to secure evidence from prominent Jewish scholars that marrying a brother's widow was a grave sin. Among those consulted was Rabbi Yaakov Raphael Payanu of Modena, a respected rabbinic figure in 16th century Italy. Richard Croke's efforts are immortalized in letters that survive to this day in the English archives, detailing his interactions with the Jews in Italy over this great matter. Let's go back in time to delve deeper into the complexities of this most unlikely event.
I'm here for the Rabbi Payanu. I'm on the right yeshiva. Is this the right place? Excellent, thank you. Hello. Is this the yeshiva of Rabbi Yaakov Raphael Payanu of Modena?
Yes, it is.
Excellent. I am here on a special mission on behalf of His Majesty, King Henry VIII, bearing a rather important question pertaining to Jewish law.
Go ahead, ask.
Is it permissible for a man to wed the wife of his deceased brother?
May I understand why you're asking this question?
I'd rather not delve into the specifics.
Well, listen, for me to provide an answer of what Jewish law says about this topic, I'm going to have to hear the details of the case.
Very well. His Majesty, King Henry VIII, has commanded me to seek answers to this query, as it pertains to his own situation. You see, he has wed Catherine of Aragon, who is the widow of his deceased brother, Prince Arthur. I seek to know if this act of marriage, which admittedly occurred about 20 years ago, is lawful or not.
Just a clarifying question. When Catherine was married to Arthur, did they bear any children from that union?
No, he had no offspring. He actually died not long after the nuptials.
Very well. I understand the question. Ladies and gentlemen, at the National Jewish Retreat, all of you here are students in my yeshiva. I am Rabbi Yaakov Raphael Piano of Modena. And every time I get a question from the Jewish community, I've never answered it on my own. I've always involved each of you, my star students. I've always involved you in answering these questions. Today is going to be no different, although the circumstances are very different. This is the first time in my recollection that we're getting a question about halakha, about Jewish law, from non-Jewish quarters. And in fact, what's more interesting, that it's coming from a monarch, from a king, as someone as famous as King Henry VIII. We heard the question, and the question we're going to put up on the screen right now, which is going to help keep our focus when we seek to answer this question. As you can see, may a man, in this case, Henry, marry the wife, in this case, Catherine, of his dead brother, in this case, Arthur, who died childless? This is the question that we are going to answer. On the tables in front of you, there are two things that you need to be aware of. You have a handout. This handout has the text that is going to provide the answer to this question. We are going to study, each of you is going to study this text with the person sitting next to you. My fellow students, I thank you very much to each of you for spending the time and the energy on answering this very important question. Now is the time for you to finalize your vote by either having the green facing me or by having the red facing me. And I'm now going to turn to someone from the crowd to share their vote. I'm looking for someone who has used the green. If you can please raise your hand to explain why this is your conclusion.
Yes, he can and actually should. A Levite marriage, when there are no children in the first marriage, they're supposed to marry.
Very well. If I understood you correctly, you're saying because there were no children when Arthur and Catherine married, so therefore this is the classic Torah case of a levirate marriage, otherwise known as Yibum, which would therefore make Henry's marriage to Catherine a valid act. Thank you very much for explaining your answer. Richard, you heard the conclusion from the students of our yeshiva. I think the answer is pretty straightforward.
Well, I disagree with that interpretation. You see, the term brother in the passage referring to levirate marriage is not referencing a literal brother, as in the case of Henry and Arthur, but instead is metaphoric, referencing a man within the same tribe.
What do you mean?
Allow me to explain. Say the dead man is from the tribe of Reuben. Now, only a man from within the same tribe, the tribe of Reuben, should be allowed to marry the widow. Otherwise, if a man, say, from the tribe of Simeon were to wed her instead, then they would inherit all of the property of the widow's former husband. This would cause a transfer of land from the tribe of Reuben to the tribe of Simeon. So the Bible commands that only a man within the same tribe may marry the widow, thus keeping the property within the tribe. That is the meaning of this passage, not about an actual brother. That is explicitly forbidden in Leviticus.
Very interesting. You seem to be saying that a brother is never allowed to marry the widow of his brother. And when the Torah seems to be talking about a levirate marriage, and it uses the term brother there, it just means another man from the same tribe. That seems to be your argument. My fellow students, you all read the texts. Was that your understanding of the text? And let's put up the motion on the screen right now. The claim is Yibum is not allowed, never allowed, with a literal brother. It refers only to another man from the same tribe. Now, if this is false, you need to show me your green card. And the reason you need to show me your green card is because that's going to mean that Henry's marriage to Catherine is green, is kosher, is okay. So if this argument is false, you need to show me your green card. If this argument is true, you need to show me your red card. And now I'm going to ask somebody who voted green to please explain their vote. Go ahead.
The answer is false. He can marry, the wife can marry the brother, but she cannot marry anybody else within the tribe. It has to be the brother.
And why are you saying that the answer is false? Where are you getting that from? Any of the texts that we studied together?
I just know about it.
You just know that. Right.
I just know the law.
So your intuition is highly accurate in this case. The texts that we learned together are explicitly talking about a literal brother. In fact, if you go to text 6, we had a biblical example of two brothers performing this levirate marriage, and they're literal brothers. Judah is the father of both Er and Onan in text number 6. And likewise, if you go back to text number 5, and we see what Maimonides says, Maimonides is very clear that it's talking about a sibling, a literal sibling. So Richard, this argument is not going to fly, it's not going to work.
Well, even if the term brother were literal, the act of a levirate marriage is not allowed should the previous marriage have been consummated. It can only occur if the original couple had been betrothed but never actually lived together. In our situation, however, Prince Arthur had in fact consummated his marriage with Catherine, and because this occurred, no levirate marriage would be allowed. Is this not true?
We're hearing now a very interesting idea. The idea being put forth by the ambassador of King Henry is that if the first marriage was actually consummated, levirate marriage, Yibum, is off the table. Let's put that motion up on the screen for us to consider. We've all studied these texts. Is that our understanding of the text? The claim is that Yibum is not allowed if the original marriage was consummated. Is that true or false? Again, if it's false, you want your green card to be facing me. If it's true, if based on the text that we all studied, it is true, then you want your red card facing me. I see a lot of green cards facing me, and that's making me feel really good. Does anyone who has a green card want to explain their vote, perhaps? Go ahead.
My name's Sandy Levine. It's false because based on the text we read specifically, under the halachic summary of the exception, it is regardless of whether the dead brother fully consummated his marriage or only betrothed his bride, the yibum is legitimate.
Correct.
So this is false. Absolutely, the marriage is legitimate.
Richard, your second try is not effective. Maimonides clearly negates what you're saying.
Well, okay, fine. I do have one final argument, though. The command of Yibum applies only to Jews, not non-Jews. Now, King Henry VIII is not Jewish. A man such as him, I believe there is no exception. He could never wed the wife of his deceased brother. Now, could you confirm for me that this interpretation is correct?
Okay, now we're getting the third claim. The third claim is that this permission for a brother to take the widow of his brother is only for Jews and is not allowed for non-Jews. Was there any information in the text that we learned today that would help us navigate that? So let's put the motion up on the screen once again. Here's the claim. Yibum, a levirate marriage, is only permissible for Jews. If that's false, I want your green card facing me. If that's true, I want your red card facing me. I'll give you a minute to consider.
The answer is false. Because even though Judah performed Yibum for his son, or he had his sons perform it, so they were following the laws of Torah. It wasn't. We hadn't actually got to Torah, so it wasn't an official rule yet. So no, you don't have to be Jewish.
That's a fascinating argument. What did you say your name is?
Yaakov.
Yaakov. Yaakov points to text 6, where we have an actual and the only case of Yibum, a levirate marriage in the Torah. But we're dealing here with Judah's children, brothers, yes, that is true, but it is before the giving of the Torah. So Yaakov argues that before the giving of the Torah, their legal definition was like Noahides, was like non-Jews. And therefore, he says, we see here a case where non-Jews, or people have the status of not being Jewish, at least legally, performed the Yibum, and therefore that negates the argument that Richard is saying. Now, I hasten to add that I'm very happy, Yaakov, that you said that. But at the same time, I want to let everyone know here in this room that this is a matter of great debate in rabbinic literature about how to regard Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their offspring and their children and their descendants before the giving of the Torah. Should they be regarded as halachic Jews? Or should they be regarded as Noahides? And there is a lot of debate and discussion about that. And what Yaakov just said fits into one way of rabbinic thinking on this particular matter, which is quite complex. I'll just add one other detail, and I think this is a really important point. I'm not familiar with any source in all of rabbinic Judaism that says that Yibum is off limits to non-Jews. We simply do not have that type of source. And that, in addition to what Yaakov said, therefore, our yeshiva turns to Richard and we say, we appreciate the fact that you came to us with this question. We are satisfied that we have provided you what we think is the proper response. We don't see any justification to say that the marriage to Catherine was invalid.
Richard Croke's attempts to secure rabbinic support proved futile, but his journey in Italy led to a significant encounter. He met Marco Gabriello, a Jew who had unfortunately converted out of his ancestral faith, and yet retained his deep knowledge of Jewish law and tradition. Marco advised Croke that he could provide sources in Jewish law beneficial to King Henry's case. Sensing an opportunity, Croke decided not to merely document Marco's testimony, but to bring him to England to advise the king directly. This move set off a chain of dramatic events. Emperor Charles, staunchly opposed to the annulment, ordered his spies in Italy to closely monitor Marco's movements. They planned to capture him as soon as he entered a territory controlled by the Holy Roman Empire. Detailed descriptions of Marco's appearance were circulated, accompanied by orders for his immediate arrest. But Marco's handlers maneuvered him discreetly through Europe, eluding the emperor's grasp. By January 1531, Marco stood before King Henry VIII in London, ready to deliver his crucial advice based on his understanding of Jewish law. We know of this dramatic encounter through the detailed reports of Eustace Chapuis, who served as the ambassador to England for Charles V. The ambassador's meticulous memos have survived to this day, and they reveal Marco's presentation to the king. Let's eavesdrop on Marco's argument that echoed through the halls of power that fateful day, words that played a part in altering the course of history.
Tell me about thyself, Jew.
Your Majesty, I was born a Jew in Italy, but then...
And art thou knowledgeable in the laws of the Jews?
Verily, Your Majesty. I studied the Talmud in my youth and retained much of its wisdom.
Good. Now tell me, can the Talmud aid me in annulling my marriage with Catherine of Aragon?
The matter is not overly complex, Your Majesty. It appears your primary motive is to wed another queen. According to Talmudic law, polygamy is permitted. Thus, you could maintain Catherine whilst taking another queen.
That is absurd. Jews do not practice polygamy.
You are correct, Your Majesty. However, there exist exceptions to this prohibition. Rabbis forbade it in the past, but your situation could qualify for one of these prohibitions. The rationale behind this is...
Nonsense! I would sooner face death than be married to 2 wives. Such an act is a grievous sin and a scandal of the highest order for a good Christian like myself. I trust you have another solution for me. We have expended great effort bringing you here to England and have offered you great reward. Do not tell me that all you have is this abhorrent notion of polygamy.
Indeed, I do have another solution, one that I believe will meet with your approval. May I proceed to offer it?
Speak.
According to Jewish law, yibum, or levirate marriage, is permitted only if performed for the sake of the mitzvah. If undertaken for other motives, such as to enjoy a woman's beauty, to solidify a political alliance, or to gain wealth, the act is forbidden and deemed null and void. Thus, it is possible your marriage to Catherine was invalid if your motives were impure.
And what were my motives? How can I recall what I intended more than 20 years past?
Your Majesty, I cannot ascertain with certainty your true motives. However, the absence of a male heir suggests you had impure or ulterior motives. It aligns with the punishment mentioned in Leviticus 20 for a man who takes his brother's wife. The Torah states there that he shall be childless. You are childless, or at least without a male heir. This could imply that your marriage to Catherine was a sin, as it was founded upon impure motives. Considering this, your marriage to Catherine was invalid and should be annulled.
There it is. That is what I needed to hear. You are dismissed.
We just heard an argument, a new argument that was proposed to King Henry. 2 arguments, in fact. The first one we're going to ignore. The first one we're going to ignore because the king ignored it. The first argument was that polygamy is permitted and therefore Henry could take a second wife. That requires analysis. We're not going to focus on that today because Henry anyway threw that out. However, the second argument, which seems to have stuck, was this idea that yes, Judaism has this concept of levirate marriage of yibum, but only in very narrow circumstances where the intention is very vital. It must be done only for the mitzvah. And if it is not done for the mitzvah, if it's done for any other motive, then not only is it forbidden, but in fact, the marriage wouldn't be recognized as by Jewish law. Let's put that motion up on the screen. Here's the claim. It's up on the screen. There are grounds in halakha to invalidate yibum performed for ulterior motives. Is that true? You're going to put up your red to face me. If that is false, you're going to have your green facing me. And I'm going to ask someone who put up a red to offer their arguments. Yes, go ahead. What's your name?
Hello.
Hi. What's your name?
Hello there. I'm Holly Lee Hackett, and I personally would say true because Rabbi Yaakov Tom stated that even if both parties want to perform yidum, if it's not for the proper motives or for the proper mitzvah, that it shouldn't really be valid.
Right. I think I understand what you're saying. You're pointing, Holly, to text number 9. In text number 9, we have Rabbi Yaakov Tam, who lived in the 12th century, one of the greatest rabbis during this period, who said that he doesn't want people doing yibum. Even if they want to do Yibum, even if they want to do the levirate marriage, he doesn't want it. He wants them to do Chalitza. Chalitza is this alternative ceremony by which the widow will do something with a shoe that kind of severs her connection with the surviving brother. And the point is that then each one goes on their way and they're not marrying each other. Rabbeinu Tam preferred that this be what happened, that they do chalitza, not yibum. And the reason seems to be, especially in light of the words that he says, unless we know for sure that they intend for the sake of the mitzvah, we see he's very concerned about motive. Rabbeinu Tam, Rabbi Yaakov Tam is very concerned about motive. That's what Holly is saying. And indeed, we see in the Talmud there's a discussion about this, and there is this view that says that motive matters, and if it's not done for the right motives, it should not be done. And so therefore, the argument that's being presented by her is that if you were to follow Rabbi Yaakov Tam, if you were to follow, he's known as Rabbeinu Tam, if you are to follow that view, then Henry's marriage to Catherine should never have happened and should therefore be illegal. Now, I hear your argument, Holly, and it's a very good argument. However, there's an obvious counterpoint to this. The obvious counterpoint is, who tells us that we should follow Rabbeinu Tam? That very same text had an alternative view. No less than Maimonides, the great Maimonides, and Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi, two of the greatest decisors of Jewish law who ever lived, they go in a different direction. They say motive doesn't matter. They say, therefore, Yibum always takes precedence because of the fact that who cares about motive? Now, I that in the year 2024, when that eventually comes, universally in the Jewish community, they are going to be following the view of Rabbeinu Tam. That is what's going to happen in the future. But remember, today it's still the year 1530. And in 1530, this is not the reality. There are still large segments of the Jewish population that follow Maimonides' ruling, that follows the ruling of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. So who are we to say that Henry gets to choose to follow the view of Rabbeinu Tam and to ignore Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi? Now, there's an argument that can be made that goes as follows. Where is Henry located? He's located in England. There was a time that England and France were one country. There was the Norman invasion where they came over from France into England. And this had an effect on the Jewish community as well, where essentially the Jewish community in England before the expulsion was a sister community to the Jewish community in France. And we know that in areas of Jewish law, they generally followed the French tradition, not Maimonides and not Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi. So that would be a little bit of an argument to say that Henry has a right to follow Rabbeinu Tam's position. But if you're going to go with that logic, then you need to think about the other side. Who's Henry's wife? Who doesn't want the marriage annulled? She's Catherine. Where is she from? We saw she's the daughter of Ferdinand and Isabella. She is a Sephardi. She's a Sephardic individual. And they follow the rulings of Rabbi Yitzchak Alfasi and of Maimonides, who says motives don't matter. So who are we to select Rabbeinu Tam's view over the other view? And so that's what makes the argument that was just said in front of the king, there's something to it, but on the other hand, it's not so simple. But now I want to turn to someone who has a green card for this particular question that was up on the screen, and to share why you think the argument was false. Do I see a hand up over there?
The way I look at it is you've got a disagreement among the sages as to whether there should be the marriage or not. But I don't see anything saying that once there is the marriage, that there's a basis for invalidation. Beautiful point.
Thank you so much for saying that, because this is a very, very important point. There is a debate whether Yibum should be done if it's being done for the wrong intention. But nowhere in text 8 and nowhere in text 9 did we see it say that if one went ahead and did it with ulterior motives, then the act is invalid, that it's null and void, then that halacha doesn't recognize the marriage. We don't see that, not in text 8 and not in text 9. That would be a very, very novel idea to come along and to say that. And so I agree with that. And for all of these reasons, it would seem that Marco's argument He may have known the Talmud really well, but it seems that he is basing himself on truth. There's grounds to what he's saying, but his conclusion that therefore the marriage should not be recognized as a matter of Jewish law seems to take the argument a little too far, a little beyond where the text brings us. And I want to bring out 1 inch more point in this regard. If you turn your handout to page number 7. There's a very brief text over there, and we're going to read this one together. It's literally one line from Maimonides. And look what Maimonides says over here in text number 10 on page number 7 of your handout. Here he's talking about non-Jews, Noahides, and he specifies the specific relationships that are forbidden to Gentiles. And he lists 6. And if you read that list closely, you're going to see that it's not the same list where there's the list, it's not the same list as for a Jew. It is true that we spoke about earlier in study segment 1 that a man is not allowed to marry the widow of his brother, unless with the exception of levirate marriage, which is very narrow circumstances. It is true that that is normally forbidden, but that's only forbidden to a Jew. For a man to marry the widow of his brother, according to Maimonides in text 10, there is no prohibition. Even without the concept of Yibum, this is okay, which means Arthur dies, Catherine's available. According to the Torah, Henry is allowed to marry Catherine, and there is no issue whatsoever, even absent the argument of Yibum. They could go ahead, they could get married. So if they want to have a conversation about divorce, there is the concept of divorce exists in Judaism, and that's a valid discussion. But to say that the marriage was invalid for the reason that it's the widow of a brother, we don't have enough evidence to make that claim. Indeed, it would seem that Henry and Catherine's marriage is kosher from the perspective of Jewish law for all of the reasons that we had the opportunity of exploring together today.
Henry VIII's determination led to a seismic shift in European history. Seeing that he was unsuccessful in securing an annulment from the Vatican, he chose to break away from the Catholic Church and to establish the Church of England. On May 23, 1533, Henry's newly appointed archbishop annulled his marriage to Catherine, and Henry crowned Anne Boleyn as his new queen. For the Jewish people, this historical episode marked a rare moment in which a Gentile monarch sought guidance from Jewish wisdom. To be sure, this interaction was far from ideal. Henry did not genuinely seek ethical guidance from the Torah. To the contrary, he hoped to weaponize Jewish law to serve his own purposes. Nevertheless, this event served as a sampling of an important Jewish aspiration. It hinted to a future in which all nations will seek moral direction from the Torah, not to advance their own agendas, but with a genuine aspiration to serve God and live ethically as non-Jews. This vision is captured in the words of the prophet Isaiah. Many peoples will approach each other and exclaim, "Come, let us ascend to God's mountain, to the house of the God of Jacob, where we will receive instruction in His ways, so that we can walk in His paths. For instruction will issue from Zion, and God's word from Jerusalem." We yearn for the day when these words will be fulfilled, and the Torah's wisdom will guide all humanity toward a just, righteous, and harmonious world. Let us strive towards this vision, living our own lives with integrity and guiding others to see the beauty and truth of the Torah's teachings.